Hello, Algebra 2. Chapter 2.6 is about graphing inequalities. This may be something you did in Algebra 1 and may not be, I'm not sure. But essentially there are 4 steps to graphing an inequality. But backing up a little bit, just to remind you if you have seen one already and to let you know if you haven't, that the way you graph an inequality is to graph what I'm going to call a boundary line, and then you're going to shade one side or the other to indicate which half, and it will be because we're doing linear equations right now, which half or which side of the graph is the one that applies, that does solve the inequality. So again, the 4 steps. The boundary line, as I'm calling it, is the linear equation you would create if it hadn't been an inequality, if it had been an equal sign. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Then you have to decide whether or not the line should be solid or dashed. If it's not an or equal inequality, in other words, if the arrow is not underlined, then your line ought to be dashed. Third is you should test out any point on the graph. 0, 0 is often good, 1, 1 is often good because they're easy numbers to work with. And if it does, as step 4 says, if it does work in the inequality, then that is the correct side to shade. If it doesn't, simply put, the other side is the one to shade. Let's look at an example. Here we've got y is less than 2x minus 1. And more simplified here, the 4 steps. I've got to graph the boundary line, then decide if it should be dashed, then test out a point, and then shade, and I will be finished. So first of all, with any piece of graph paper, you got to decide what your units are going to be. And I believe on all of the ones that I'm going to show you in this video, this setup here, where every 2 spaces is 1 unit, is going to work. I plot my b, my y-intercept at -1. I apply the slope, 2 over 1. I draw the line through it. Should it be dashed? In this case, it should be dashed because that arrow is not underlined, so I change that to a dash. And what I'm going to tell you in class is what I often do is go ahead and draw this line with pencil and then simply pull out an eraser to indicate that the line is supposed to be dashed. Okay, the next step, I should test out a point. Well, as I say, 0, 0 is often good. It's often an easy set of coordinates to work with, and here clearly 0, 0 is to the left of this, left and above this dashed line. So I plug 0, 0 into my inequality, and I ask myself with a question mark here, is it true that 0 is less than 2 times 0 minus 1? So work it out. 2 times 0, that's 0. 0 minus 1, well, minus 1 is not greater than 0. So this is on the wrong side. That means I shade the other side, and I am done here. But I can always test. I can try a point clearly far to the left and clearly far to the right, or clearly far above and far below, just to make sure that I'm right. So I'm going to try these 2 points. Plugging in first 1, 0, which should work. I put it in the equation, and it turns out it is true. 2 times 1, which is 2, minus 1 is 1. And 1 is greater than 0. This is on the correct side. How about if I just had happened to try -5, 0? Well, in that case, I've got 2 times -5, or -10. And -10 minus 1 is -11. Clearly, that's not more than 0. So I have shaded the correct side. Trying another problem here, now done in standard form. I'm strongly going to urge you to learn again to graph these with the cover-up method so you're plotting both your x and y intercepts. If you don't do that, if you're going to try to rearrange this so that it's in slope-intercept form, then you're going to move this 3x over and you're going to have -y. That means you're going to have to remember when you divide by negative to change the direction of this arrow, and if you don't, you're going to get it all wrong. I think it's much easier, in this case and many others, to get an accurate solution without any mistakes along the way if you just learn to plot both intercepts. So there's my y-intercept down there, and I got that by covering up x, and then I've got -y equals 7, which means if I move the negative over, y equals -7. So there's that y-intercept. The x-intercept, if I cover up y, I've got 3x equals 7, or in other words, x equals 7/3, or 2 1/3. Now, admittedly, it's not simple to plot 2 1/3 on the graph as I've marked it out here with every 2 spaces being 1 unit. But I draw a line through that, and I've got one that I'm pretty comfortable with, pretty confident of. I've said before that graphing is often a judgment call, as is reading a graph. Now, should it be dashed or not? It does not need to be dashed this time because the arrow is underlined. Now I got to test out a point. Well, clearly, again, 0, 0 is well to one side or the other, so I'm going to try that again. I plug 0 in for both x and y, and I ask myself, is 3 times 0 minus 0? In other words, this whole side is going to be 0. Is that less than 7? And this time it is. So I shade that side. I could have always tried another point to the right or to the left. Just to double check one here, 5, 0 should not work. I plug it in, I get 3 times 5, or in other words 15 minus 0. Well, that's not less than 7, it's more than 7. So this is on the wrong side, should not have been shaded. I've shaded the correct side. Okay, you're ready to try one. Go ahead and work this one out, hit the pause button, and when you come back I'll show you the solution. Alright, I'm going to assume that you did that, and I'm just going to jump straight to the solution. This should be your boundary line, as I've been calling it. It should be solid, and you should have shaded above and to the left. And if you have any questions about this, come into class and ask me about them. This was in effectively slope-intercept form, and I want you also to try one that's in standard form. So again, go ahead and hit the pause button. When you come back, I'll show you the solution. Okay, I'm going to assume that you did that. And here's what I've drawn. This time it should be a dashed or dotted line. Sometimes I call it one, sometimes the other. And that's because this arrow is not underlined. It should have these x and y intercepts, and therefore this slope, and you should have shaded to the left and below that boundary line. Again, any questions, let me know in class when we meet again. And here's your homework.